Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 27 of Logicast, the AWS News Podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that I'm not in my usual setting today. I am, in fact, on location in Vienna, but I'm so committed to the cause that I'm in a rented office space in Vienna to continue to bring you the Logicast podcast. So I'm also joined, as always, as you might expect, by my colleague, lead cloud engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
You're in Vienna. Means nothing to me.
Vienna.
Had to be done. I'm not even showing my age there because that song's older than I am. So
I don't think it's older than I am, but yeah, I do get the joke, and I've
the
heard
80s,
many times.
I think Ultravox is
Yeah.
the 80s.
Many times.
No, I'm good. I'm good. My feet have just about recovered from Friday. I'm still a little bit peopled out though.
Yes, you've been a bit of a conference burnout from a one-day conference in Brighton where we were repping Logicata in the Brighton tech community. But a good day out, I think. So, and some good conversations were had. Anyway, we digress. Let's introduce our special guest for today. We're very lucky to be joined by fellow AWS community member Tim Dodd. How are you doing today, Tim?
Doing well. I wish I could be in Vienna or Brighton, but Philadelphia's still nice.
Vienna's pretty hot. It's a lovely place to be, but the weather has dropped by about 10 degrees Celsius, I think, between yesterday and today. And I'm very glad of that, because if I was sitting in this room yesterday, you'd probably be seeing the sweat beading down my brow. It's been pretty warm and humid here. So, but yeah, it's a lovely city to be in on location. So, you're based in the great city of Philadelphia. So tell us a little bit, Tim, about what you do for the AWS community in Philadelphia and beyond.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, there was a reInvent conference for security, which is called Reinforce. So I started a community called Refill, which really gets technology leaders that are in the AWS community together on a monthly basis. So this month, we have a bunch of county CIOs. I don't know how you guys call counties in the UK, but we have local government. And so they all get together, and we figured we'll host them at a refill event. So we do that. And the next month we'll be doing a happy hour, hopefully outside, not 100 degrees, or doing that. So every month we do something for the community. It's been great. And I appreciate you guys inviting me to promote it.
You're very welcome. Great to have you on board. We have counties in the UK as well. I don't know if they're the same construct as US counties, but we definitely have counties.
I think they probably are. They're just quite a bit smaller.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, our entire country probably fits in one of your counties, but it's a scale issue. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the scale of America versus the UK, or indeed, the weather in Vienna and Philadelphia. We are here, as regular listeners to the podcast will know, to talk about AWS news. Once a week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John picks a selection of the articles, shares with our guest for discussion on the podcast. So we have, of course, shared such a selection of articles with Tim. And the first of those articles is an article on the where is this one? Actually, it doesn't say at the top. I'm looking at it in a slightly different view than usual. It's actually a feature announcement, isn't it, on the AWS website? So this is the feature announcement that Amazon DynamoDB Global Tables with multi-region strong consistency is now generally available. So we've seen this in preview. I think perhaps since since reInvent this went into
it was
preview?
At the same time as reInvent. It was at reInvent because it came out at the same time as Aurora DSQL.
Exactly. So, and I think I heard you getting pretty excited about this, perhaps at the conference last week when talking to people about it. So I'm hoping that you've managed to retain that excitement for today's episode. But tell me, John, why did you pick this particular announcement?
Because once again, the same as with DSQL, AWS has taken on physics and appears to have won, which is no mean feat. That they've basically beaten physics into submission. So this is around the same time as Aurora DSQL came out, and I assume it's using the same kind of data plane backbone that they put together for Aurora DSQL, because it's the same kind of thing, right? It's just DynamoDB is NoSQL versus Aurora being Postgres relational, right? This is really, really cool, though, because put the physics nerd aside for a minute. Yes, I really like physics. I did really badly in it at school, but I like physics because I think it's interesting. And I'm a sci-fi nerd because obviously I am. But this, from a tech perspective, is really interesting, right? Because it's the same use cases as DSQL, but for the NoSQL community instead. So what this is doing, multi-region, strong consistency down to, I don't know what the millisecond latency is. There'll be a number somewhere. I don't have it offhand, which lets you start to do properly regionally distributed systems. Now, Dynamo, has been doing this kind of for a little while with global tables, but they weren't strongly consistent. They were, like most things in the cloud, they're eventually consistent. And honestly, that was fine, because so long as you didn't need your users in Europe and the US to have exactly the same data at exactly the same time, and odds are you probably didn't, that was okay. And it worked reasonably well, because you could just kind of use it as if it was local. Now it's strongly consistent. It's limited though to a handful of regions. It's the big ones. It's the tier one, for lack of a better term, regions, but it's not everywhere yet. And again, that kind of makes sense. It's the same regions that Aurora DSQL is available in. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because in order to get this to work, you've got to run new cabling and big, thick things, and satellites have to be in certain places and kind of all the rest of it. So you're not going to get it in the more esoteric regions. You're certainly not going to get it in the tier 2 and 3 regions. However you define that, I don't know. But it's available in kind of the top 10. And it's a really nice thing if you do need now relational and non-relational data storage that's consistent between regions, and not just for things like DR, for actively serving users in multiple places at the same time and having the same data set that's just agreeing with itself.
Tim, anything to add there? What are your thoughts on this this new feature going into GA?
Not to push you to go back to London or in the US, but I would imagine Vienna is a tier 2 data center, if I'm not mistaken. But I think, for me, it's also about the data integrity, high availability, and disaster recovery. So if you think about critical resources that you're doing as a global, I used to work at Oracle, and we had companies that had things all over the place, right? The ability to function in a high availability across the pond just didn't exist when I worked at Oracle. So I think that's a huge thing. And then, for the county CIOs that may see this, think about emergency response. That's a huge thing. Or if you're doing critical things within your organization.
Yeah, so I had to look that up after you mentioned it, Tim. And Vienna is a lowly edge location. It's not actually classed as a region at all. So I guess the nearest region would be one of the German regions.
It'd be Frankfurt. It's in Frankfurt, so you could do it in Frankfurt.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because the tier 1 regions, and I put it in air quotes because I don't think that's ever an official term, but it's kind of, subjectively, it's these regions that tend to get things first. And I've said this before, it's where you tend to see financial trading hubs in my experience, because if you look at the non-US ones to a great extent, London, big trading hub. Ireland, less so, but it's kind of the Europe that isn't London. It's a little bit cheaper. Paris has some trading going on. Frankfurt, big trading hub. Tokyo, yep. Seoul, yep. So it's kind of the financial centers that tend to be T1, tier 1.
Yeah, obviously Vienna is not a big financial center, but it is the European HQ of the UN. Yeah, I guess
it doesn't need any service then. Sod that.
On that note, John, let's move along to our second article for this week. And this is another AWS feature announcement. This is the announcement of the availability of Amazon ECS optimized Windows Server 2025 AMIs. So we don't normally talk about Windows much. We're normally obviously mostly a Linux shop, but AWS has recently announced the availability of these ECS optimized Windows Server 2025 AMIs. So I'm curious why you picked this one, John, really?
To rant about Windows and Docker mostly. I don't care about this announcement. This announcement is kind of meh, whatever. You've made some updated server images available to run on ECS. Cool, bully for you, right? That's just sort of the thing we expect AWS to be doing, because that's kind of what we pay them for, is to make sure that this kind of under the cover stuff is just handled. And good that they've done it, right? Because I don't know when the 2025 OS came out. I don't pay attention to Windows Server OS releases because I have a life. But what this is kind of showing is there's this really annoying for lack of a better term, restriction with running Docker workloads, because you think, well, it's in a container. You can just put a Windows container in a Linux box, but you can't. And that's really immensely frustrating because of how kernels and things get shared up the container stack. And if you don't know enough about it, you think, well, why can't I just put my Windows app on Bottle Rocket or whatever? And you can't. You do end up stuck with these Windows servers kind of underpinning everything, because you can't do it's not cross OS, it's cross kernel, strictly speaking, Docker container hosting. So whilst the announcement in and of itself is quite dull, we expect AWS to keep doing this, and it's good that they have kept doing it, right? Because if you are running .NET applications in Docker because you don't want to run whole servers, fair enough, I don't blame you, then you have the ability to now use kind of more up-to-date hosts and things. I would still recommend, in as far as possible, looking at things like Fargate or looking at moving to running .NET on Linux, because you will just have a better time of things. But if you've done the old app to container trick, or whatever the equivalent is for Windows, and you've gone, well, here's my app, mush, and shoved it in a container, and then, oh, we're cloud native now because we're containerized. Well, you're not, but okay, it's a step in the right direction. Then you're not being left out in the cold. You're not being left in the dark. You are still getting the latest updates, and AWS is still providing service, which is good.
So, Tim, are you more of a fan of Windows Server than John, or are you in that same camp?
So I started out as a developer, so I would say I'm a closet Linux fan. But I would say for most people out there, and I love Docker, by the way. So tangent, before my refill event, I used to run a lot of the Puppet and Chef user groups in Philly until we all merged into a Philly DevOps group. But there's three things I think you guys should care about, right? One is auto scaling. I think that's huge with this announcement. Managed patching, I think is pretty big. And then I think ultimately, as people are forced to upgrade out of the environment from like the old legacy Windows, you're eventually going to have to upgrade anyway. So you might as well go to 25, and this really drives your app modernization strategy. So those are the three things that John should care about this.
I don't do Windows. Stop that. The only thing I really care about from this article is at the end of the second paragraph, and maybe by the time the listeners go and read it, they'll post a correction. But it says the host net rocking service.
Yes, the human or AI proofreader has not spotted that typo there in paragraph 2. So maybe this is why some of these articles disappear, because I was scrolling through my news feed this morning and found yet another exciting news article I wanted to read gone from the AWS blog. It was a 404 error. So we do, because we spend so much time looking at these things, we do find quite a lot of these bizarrely. Sometimes it happens in between us sharing the articles with the guest and then coming to talk about them. We go to talk about it and it's disappeared. But the Wayback Machine is our friend, because it will have cached those pages, and sometimes we can find the articles. We've still never got down to the bottom of why these things do disappear. So
I think you mean it's cached, those pages.
They've cached. Well, it depends, whether you're... Yeah, it depends whether you're him or the rest of the world. But anyway, moving swiftly on to our next discussion this week. Our next article this week. This is another feature announcement that AWS Backup now supports copying Amazon S3 backups across regions and across accounts in the AWS GovCloud US region. So, Tim, I'm going to come to you first on this one, so you have a chance to speak before John. What are your thoughts on this one? We don't normally talk about GovCloud, actually, do we, John? But
no, and there's a good reason for that.
Anyway, Tim, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, so one is, in which you guys probably don't know, but we just passed a huge budget in the US that we call the Big Beautiful Bill. So there's a cloud first strategy going on in a lot of government. So the fact that this is out is awesome. So there's one is around this concept of 3-2-1 backup strategy, right? So 3 copies, 2 media, 1 offsite. I think that's critical. Backing up the data. I'll say, like, from my background as a when I moved to programming, I went to what now we call cloud hosting. But the number one use case for people getting to cloud was backups, right? You start with backups, then DR, and then production. I think a lot of the government agencies tend to be on the more how should we say, conservative view of this. So getting the ability to do backups in GovCloud will help them. And there's been major issues over the years, right, where people lose backups and they have not been willing to go to the cloud. So I think this is a big step. So when the county CIOs are in Philly, they should be paying attention that this is here. And if you're not backing up your data, you should be doing it.
Yeah, I seem to remember that conversation with someone on Friday actually about backup being the first workload to go to the cloud. I think that's a common pattern. If people are sort of a little bit mistrusting of the cloud and not wishing to move production, then get the backups on there, and hopefully the rest will follow. But what are your thoughts on this one, John? Why did you pick it in particular?
Well, I'm just going to touch on that point first because that's really interesting. Is we don't really trust it with production, but we'll put our backups there, which means you have to fully and fundamentally trust it anyway. Otherwise, I don't trust that it's going to be there. So why are you bothering? Like, that's just the logical fallacy. It's just mind-boggling. But there we go. I did have a similar conversation actually on Friday, and it was less around the trust and more around, well, we're having this big explosion of data, and to start with, it's just backups for everything, and we don't really know where to go from there. Pop it in the cloud because storage is no longer your problem. You just pay for it, right? It's functionally unlimited as far as you're concerned. Just use it, as opposed to having to worry about disks and putting things in sleds and all that old-fashioned stuff. So yeah, that's just really interesting kind of logical fallacy of, well, we don't trust it with production, but we'll put our backups in it, which are production.
Backups are not important until you need them. And then you find out that they're not consistent or available or useful.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But no, I picked on this because, again, I've done this again. It's not a particularly interesting announcement. If you know that you need this, then you already know that you need this, and you're probably not listening to me talk about it, right? But this is highlighting for me the difference between the commercial regions and GovCloud, because I think there's one. Is there two GovCloud regions now? I don't know. I honestly don't keep track.
Yeah, there's two, I think, in the US.
Yeah, and I would honestly call EU Sovereign Cloud, when that comes out, a similar sort of animal. It'll have different kind of management structures around it, but it's a similar sort of animal to GovCloud, right? And what this is showing is GovCloud is not even a tier 3 service. It's like a tier 4 or tier 5 region, because stuff comes to that so late. Like, we've had S3 backups being copied between accounts and regions in commercial regions for, I couldn't even tell you how long. It's at least 5 years. It's probably longer than that. And to be fair to AWS, they do say, don't use GovCloud unless you have to, right? That's kind of the official line, or the semi-official line, is only use it if it's absolutely correct for your workloads and if it's correct for your business line. Effectively, you're not choosing it because it supports the workload. You're choosing it because you can't use a commercial region for one reason or another, compliance and some such. This is, however, massively, massively important, because whilst S3, regardless of where you put it, has it's the famous 11 nines, but it's 11 nines of durability, which translates to, over a given year, if you stored a terabyte of data, you could expect to lose a gig or something like that. It's some sort of ridiculous number that over a period of time you could expect to lose a tiny percentage of the data because of this 11 nines of durability. It's
much less than a gig. It's like a few K or something. It's,
something like that. Yeah, it's a piddly amount. But that, okay, that's great. We like that, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always available. And you also need to guard against things like availability. And having things in multiple regions, multiple accounts, does help with availability, because particularly multiple regions, they're definitely in distinct data centers. And if you can move it to the other GovCloud region, great, because that's a distinct data center region. It's completely, I think, opposite end of the country, I think, which is kind of necessary if you're guarding against these sorts of things being unavailable. And then cross account is handy as well, because it just means that you can do things that the rest of us take for granted in terms of, I'm going to do my backups in one place and I'm going to migrate them to a storage account somewhere else, because we kind of take that for granted that you can do that and you can colo them, and it allows for segregation of duties and workloads and best practice and all that sort of thing. And now the GovCloud is coming into this century, which is, necessary. So yeah, this is a really dull announcement. If you need it, you already know that you need it and it's already there. And your CISO may or may not be having, conniptions about this, but it's a good thing. Promise, it's a good thing.
Well, I just had a quick Google search for the 11 nines durability, and I found this great example on Reddit. So I don't know whether it's 100% correct or not, but the example is 11 nines durability. If you were to store 10,000 objects in Amazon S3, you can on average expect to incur a loss of a single object once every 10 million years. That's what 11 nines of durability is. So it's pretty durable. Yeah. Yeah. On that note, let's move along to our next article. Unless you had something more to say on that, John?
No, all good.
No? Great. Okay, let's move along to our fourth article for this week. And we've managed to get 20 minutes into this episode before mentioning AI, but of course it's inevitable in the current landscape that we're always going to have to talk about something AI in relation to AWS. So this one is all about... it's from an AWS hero, Evandro Pires, published on dev.to, all about how he built a Chrome extension with AI to understand any web page. So I guess this is for the generation of short attention spans, which I probably class myself in, but I guess the younger you get, the shorter they get, in terms of generations, that is. What's the statistic? I think if a web page doesn't load within 2 minutes, you're going to go 2 seconds. 2 minutes would be awful. If a web page doesn't load in 2 seconds, I think you lose something like 50% of your traffic. This is once it's loaded, how can I quickly understand what's on it without actually reading it? So Evandro has built this Chrome extension to help understand any web page using AI. So what are your thoughts on this one, John?
I'm installing it immediately. No, I can't. It's against policy, but I love this sort of thing because it's a practical application of AI that isn't vaporware or vibe coding. And I'm really anti all those sorts of things. And I vibe coded my £10 million business in an afternoon, and I'm being hacked because you don't understand what you've done. This is much more powerful than that and much more interesting because, okay, take the internet back 30 years and it was not a great place to be, but there wasn't a lot there. Take it back a little while less than that, and it's mostly cat videos. And I think it still is mostly cat videos. But in the space that we live in, particularly big, long articles like this one's pretty long, but there's others that we've genuinely on the pod before we've said, and I got bored reading this because it was about a 20-minute read and I got bored after about 4. And again, I'm reasonably short attention span. I don't know if that's an age thing or just the way my brain is, but I think it's working in ops. It's ruined my attention span. It just has to be done. But we get bored after a couple of minutes and think, oh, I got bored, and then we just sort of talk about it afterwards. This is doing 2 really important and interesting things. The first is it's summarizing the information itself, right? Which if you've got a really big, long article or a big white paper that you need to kind of understand, and it doesn't matter if it's not 100% accurate, because all you're doing is you're doing what we're doing here with the information. For instance, you're mouthing off about it on the internet. If you're a little bit wrong, kind of doesn't matter, right? I probably wouldn't trust it certainly with that review, with doing things like summarizing big medical documents or legal documents or those sorts of things. And whilst they're great use cases for AI, a bit more accuracy is needed there than you might necessarily get. Cool. That's problem the first. And problem the second, which it isn't really called out as a problem per se, but it's kind of doing it, is as native English speakers, we sort of expect the internet to be in English because it is by and large, but it isn't always, right? And you find this sometimes. You probably find this in Austria, where it will be in whatever language it is they speak in Austria. Austrian, I suppose. I don't know if it's a
German
version of. Is it German? Is it a funny version of German?
There is an Austrian dialect, yes. There is a specific Viennese dialect, actually, which we were discussing at a party the other night. I don't speak any of those dialects or German, in fact, at all. But yes, there is a specific Austrian German and a Viennese German.
Yes, but the point is, you might go to a local pub's website, for instance, and think, well, I don't speak German. I don't read German. I certainly don't read Viennese, Austrian German. How can I get this to to make sense to me? And there's much more of a problem for non-English speakers because so much of the internet, including this article, is in English. So it's a problem that we face occasionally, but much more the other way around. And what the article is doing is what the plugin is doing is what Google has kind of done reasonably well. Is this page appears to be in German? Would you like to translate it? Yes, please. But I imagine that the GPT is going to do that a little bit better because it's got a much bigger context, much bigger kind of corpus of training data, and it's going to summarize the the page for you, and it's going to respond in your own language if you ask it to, which is just amazing, because it's, well, here's this great big long article in a language you don't speak. Here's a summary in a language that you do speak, so you can understand kind of the gist of it, and you can understand the gist of it without having to then run it through a translator and kind of all the rest of it. So that's really, really cool. I'd love to be able to use this, but I think it's going out to ChatGPT, I imagine. I haven't. Yeah, so that kind of ends up with a problem. Oh no, it's using Nova via Bedrock, so that's kind of okay. Because in some cases you want to be a bit, I don't want to send data to this, that, or the other model, and that works reasonably well. So I like it. I like it a lot. I don't know if it's available for just downloading, and I probably wouldn't. It's use. Yeah, okay. It's available, but maybe don't go and just run your production wikis and what have you through this, because you might not want to do that. But it's a great use case for that as well, and it's the sort of thing that I might kind of try and pinch some of the code base for, because I hate reading RO documentation.
Okay, well, I was going to go over to Tim and ask his opinion, but I think he's having some connection issues right now. So I don't know, are you back, Tim?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a good connection, but if you guys can hear me. Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
You guys hear me all right?
Video's gone. Yeah, we can hear you. Your video's got a little blocky, but that's fine. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this, and how is your attention span before you answer? Is it as bad as John and I, or is yours a little bit longer?
All right. Yeah, I mean, just a quick soundbite. From my perspective, think about from a citizen service perspective, we just changed rules to make it harder to apply for what we call food stamps or for healthcare for poor people. I think this is a really good use case that you can use the extension to help you apply for these government services. So everything else you said, I would echo that as well.
Yeah, that's a hell of a thing, actually, because regardless of what country you're in, I only have experience of anything, any part of the UK tax system, but that's horrific too. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Excellent. Well, on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week. And you almost had a nice segue to this one, John, when you were talking about public large language models and your data being put into chatbots and disappearing out there into the model, being used to train the model and potentially reappearing in somebody else's prompt response. So this article talks about how you can help to prevent that by building your own generative AI landing zone on AWS. So this is an article on the AWS Partner Network blog about how you can rapidly build a generative AI landing zone on AWS. So we talk a lot about landing zones. We implement landing zones for our customers under our managed service, etc. So what would be different about a generative AI landing zone, John, to a typical landing zone? If anything.
Well, I'm not going to answer that directly. I'm first going to drop the joke of, if you can't afford an API key for a service, just ask ChatGPT. It's probably got one.
Yeah, just hope it's not yours.
Yeah. So it's not so much that it's different from a regular landing zone, so much as it's kind of serving a different purpose, right? So when we talk about a normal landing zone, we talk about things like segregation of workloads and security, standardizing best practices, putting things like guardrails in place, making sure that developers can't do something silly like buying a reserved instance for the biggest server you can in the development account, because that's an excellent way of going out of business, and those sorts of sensible controls. And then making sure that, again, the rogue actor can't go and delete all of your CloudTrail logs that shows them exfiltrating data, i.e. the Unify Ubiquity thing that happened a few years ago. Cool. Right. Gen AI puts another spin on that in the same way that lots of other things put another spin on it, right? There's a Gen AI lens for the well-architected framework in the same way that there's a, this, that, or the other lens, small, medium business, I keep wanting to say the Altair data lens, which I don't know why I remember that one, but I do. So there's various lenses on the well-architected framework, and this is just kind of a lens on a landing zone is the way I view this. And if you go through the logic, the 5 layers of the architecture make sense in any kind of context, but they just look a little bit different, right? So layer 1, foundational guardrails, and they're the same for everything, plus the bedrock guardrails, and those are making sure that it's not being offensive and these sorts of things. Cool. Layer 2 is the dev fast lane, which is making sure that you're not impacting and blocking your developers from doing work by virtue of your guardrails. And that's kind of moving things out a little bit. That's making things a little bit easier. That's having pre-rolled catalogs of things. In this case, it's a prompt catalog, but traditionally it would be service catalog. And then composable building blocks. And then that's again the same thing. It's just instead of just CDK and IAC and landing zone accelerator modules, you've then got agents and RAG workflows and stuff being built on top. And then observability and cost being layer 4. Again, it's more of the same. It's just a bedrock specific flavor because that's talking about logs, metrics, traces, dashboards, those sorts of things. It's just putting a bedrock flavor on top of that. And then continuous governance is again putting a bedrock flavor on top of that. It's having, separate accounts for things. It's having SCPs and RCPs and using organizations and doing drift detection. So there's nothing groundbreaking about a Gen AI specific landing zone. It's a landing zone plus some Gen AI bits. And that's just worth bearing in mind, I think, because if you look at the standard kind of landing zone diagram, it looks a little bit different to this because it says the accounts over here and accounts over there and lots of boxes and everything kind of moving and data moving around. But at its core, it's the same basic concept. It's you comply by default. You have things like sandboxes available for developers. You reuse rather than rebuild because it's faster and it's easier and it's cheaper. See it, show it, fix it, which is a great management soundbite. That's great. I love that. It's, you can see it and I can show it to you and then you can fix it. Great. And then, the thing about security as well. So it's not groundbreaking stuff. It's not anything that's particularly, weird or difficult to comprehend or understand. It's well trodden, but with a Gen AI flavor on top. And there is, to be fair, a way you can just deploy the landing zone, because if you scroll down, there's a whole bunch of stacks that you can deploy. And I think they do it through CDK. But you can go off and deploy that yourself using CDK if you really want to.
And what if you've got, all well-managed AWS environments should already have a landing zone. So how does this integrate with your existing landing zones? It kind of bolt on the side? Is this just the setup for the accounts in which the Gen AI workloads are going to run? Or how does it kind of integrate with that?
It sort of interfaces with your existing landing zone because you should absolutely have one. It's just, like I say, it's just adding some extra things. So the version out of the box that you've already got, there will be some bits that you need to change from this example, right? Because there's bedrock guardrails policy that they give you, which is fine. There's some SCPs for using things in regions and source VPCs, which is kind of okay. And then there's this whole LZ core, guardrails, IAM, KMS. You probably have a lot of that already, but then there's some more bedrock bits in it. And that's kind of the same again, right? So the concept is absolutely just extend your existing landing zone, add these kinds of things in. But obviously the example they've got is working on the assumption that you have nothing.
Cool. Okay, well, sounds pretty interesting. And I know certainly there's a lot of interest in AI from the conference that we attended last week in all aspects of AI, the sort of application end right through to the infrastructure end. This, of course, is very firmly at the infrastructure end, but all applications need infrastructure regardless of whether they are AI or not. So that brings us neatly to the end of our time for this week. Unfortunately, we have lost Tim due to a connectivity issue, but we did get to hear some of his insights earlier on in the episode. So thank you very much, Tim, for your contributions. And sorry that you weren't able to make it to the end of the episode, but it's great to have you on. So as I said, that is all we have time for season 4, episode 27 of Logicast. If you enjoyed it, please do tell your friends. We are available to download from wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, if you'd like to see Tim jumping in and out of the call, you can see that on our YouTube channel, along with all of the other funny faces that we pull when we are talking about AWS news. So thank you very much for listening. That's all for this week. We will be back next week with you we will be back with you next week with another episode of Logicast. Until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you, John. See you next week.